Half of my life has been spent waiting for this show to come out. No, that's not hyperbole. In all my 23 years of existence, 12 have been spent, after watching The Mask of Zorro in 2010, waiting for this character to make his inevitable return. Over the years since the last Zorro project in the US, The Legend of Zorro released, the character would only survive through supplementary material, such as books, animation, comics, and the occasional mediocre video game. And while many fans were satiated by said releases, especially the godlike Dynamite Comics run, and the unique and bold American Mythology Comics run, many others, including myself, yearned for Zorro to return to the screen, outside the rare animated appearance. I myself was only 4 years old by the time The Legend of Zorro came out, beginning the longest hiatus for the character that he's ever faced. I spent my entire childhood and teenage years not knowing a version of the character I could call my own, and for many other Zoomers, Zorro was only known as the guy from the pirate anime, with the Curse of Capistrano himself fading away into obscurity.
La venganza es personal. La justicia es para todos. ¿Crees que volviste para vengar la muerte de tu padre? No, volviste para decidir el destino de California.
But, as of January 19th, 2024, Secuoya Studios, a television company hailing from Spain, has created the first ever live-action Zorro in basically forever. I've been following the production of this show since the beginning, all the way back in late 2021. God, that feels like ages ago. And seeing this project progress to this point was just such a treat. So many other Zorro projects have started and ended production without ever seeing the light of day. Well, this show has been created in the background, and it's inspiring to see this little Zorro show being produced by a relatively new company and defy the odds and bring the masked hero back into the spotlight. With all that out of the way, I'd like to talk about the show itself and how Secuoya Studios revived a legend. I'm going to start with a lot more of the superficial stuff. I'll be saving stuff like narrative choices for last, but for now I'll focus a lot more on the surface level of the show. While I adore the classics, the old Disney show, the silent film, and the Saturday morning cartoon, most of the Zorros made back then will not appeal to a modern audience. And I'm not just talking about the social themes, those actually tend to age decently for stories of their time. No, I mean the fights and swashbuckling. Because a lot of the duels and battles of the Zorros of old, while impressive for their time, probably won't resonate with a lot of the younger audiences. Lots of awkward fixed cameras, cutting away mid-fight, and while a lot of the cinematography holds up well, it doesn't have the same oomph that modern action flicks tend to have. The only exceptions were the Antonio Banderas movies, but even then they sometimes show their age. Yes, I know that's a super hot take to say, and it's not a slight against the film, but even classics can age. New Zorro show? Oh, it just feels just right from a Zoomer perspective. The fights in the show are so well choreographed and feel grounded, but also retain a larger-than-life swashbuckling feel. While there aren't a large amount of one-on-one sword duels like in previous Zorro stories, there is a large variety of different fights, with Zorro fighting some swordsmen, lots of gunmen, Nalen with her tomahawks and spear, and even in one episode fighting a platoon's worth of Chinese bodyguards with his fists in a fight that resembles the Netflix Daredevil show or The Raid, more than your classic stereotypical Zorro story. Obviously, Diego de la Vega uses his classic rapier and combat along with his whip, but this version of him also adds throwing knives to his arsenal, which come in handy when an enemy's just a little too far from him. Well, since Diego's not the only Zorro, now Lin also has a completely different fighting style than him. European swashbuckling fare is replaced with agile, fleet-footed combat with twin tomahawks, a two-headed spear, and a particularly nasty knife that she uses mostly against the defenseless Diego.
Hey, Apple! What? Knife?
Instead of straightforward combat, she practically slides around like a serpent, reflecting the native spirit that she used to represent before she spurned it. Even the original Zorro that we only see a bit of, Pullman Quaker, has his own fighting style, dual-wielding a tomahawk and a rapier, bridging both the worlds of the Californios and the natives. No matter who we see, however, it is always with the most snappy, clean, and intense choreography we've seen in the Zorro franchise. Most of it was done by the actors themselves too, with stunt actors only doing the more dangerous action sequences. Both Zorro actors Miguel Bernadao and Dalia Giacowadl trained extensively for their roles, with Miguel Bernadao even saying, "We did 90 to 95% of all the stunts, and they stopped being fun 5 months in." There are even lots of really cool gunplay moments, which you rarely see in Zorro stories outside the old serials. Lolita is an absolute beast with a rifle, and seeing her quickscope people like nobody's business was really cool. And while I have an issue with Samael that I'll talk about later, him blasting people with a Colt Patterson like Captain Love is really entertaining. I also love the diversity of guns too. Not only do we get a revolver a couple years before Samuel Colt even invented it, but we also get a variety of double-barreled pistols, and Lolita even gains a needle rifle near the end of the show. It's not just the fights and weapons that rock too, it's also the... God, I suck at segues. Whoever the cinematography crew were, they must have been paid an insane amount because they absolutely locked in for filming. Most, if not all of the filming for the show was done in the Spanish Canary Islands, a place with no shortage of beautiful locations, and God, it shows. There's multiple times a location is set up that just blows my mind. Los Angeles looks so absolutely cool, bustling with life from all various cultures that inhabited at the time. Not to mention the various set pieces that are set up throughout the season. The De La Vega Hacienda looks so beautiful and homely, and despite being smaller than previous versions, it definitely looks like a place a noble Don would live. Lolita's Hacienda, La Perla, is also super cool too, and the battle that happens on it kicks ass due to the space and verticality both indoors and outdoors. My personal favorite location, however, is the absolutely stunning 19th century New York. And while we don't see a lot of it, what we can see just feels so amazing. And with how the show ends, we're probably going to be seeing a lot more of it.
Necesitaremos caballos y carros aquí.
No, tenemos explosivos. Ataquemos esta noche la prisión.
Sí, claro, ya de paso volamos la mansión del gobernador, que total es un símbolo de la opresión.
Me gusta.
One of the most important and enduring ways to see if a Zorro story will endure the test of time is how good its cast is. Some of the best Zorro stories, like the legendary Disney Zorro and New World Zorro shows, are hard carried by their ingenious casting choices and actor synergy. Movies like The Mask of Zorro would not have hit as hard without Antonio Banderas and Anthony Hopkins and their dynamic as master and pupil. And this show would be nowhere near as good without the amazing actors and actresses in this show, both individually and with their interactions with each other. Due to the astonishing amount of talented people that are involved in this show, I'll be creating subsections of this part, dedicated to the actors and their characters I feel like deserve special attention. Starting with...
Es terreno sagrado. Jesús ha hecho a los mercaderes del templo latigazos. Yo solo sigo su ejemplo.
Okay, so one of the first details of this entire show coming out was that the titular character would be played by Spanish veteran actor Miguel Bernadao, primarily known for his roles in shows like Elite or 1899. Upon seeing the casting choice for him, many people were genuinely surprised, and not all of them in a good way. Most other Zorro actors have always had jet black hair and a more handsome face, but Miguel Bernadao is more blonde and pretty. Now, I certainly don't mind that at all, but a lot of people were thinking, how is he going to play a good Don Diego? But by the time the show released, a lot of people have completely turned around for him, as his portrayal of Diego is one of the most three-dimensional, vulnerable portrayals that we have seen in the franchise. But a lot of his detractors don't realize that Miguel Bernadette is coming from a long list of actors cast to be Zorro because they are what the current audience considers to be attractive. In 1920, many women found short, little funny guys like Douglas Fairbanks attractive. In 1940, they invented bisexuality with Tyrone Power, and Alain Delon was literally considered a sex symbol in his film career, way before he was casted to be Zorro. One of the biggest appeals for Bernadette in my generation is that we find him exceptionally pretty. My type in men has always been more picky than my types for women, and pretty much every other Zorro actor hasn't really made me feel the same feelings previous actors have made people in their generations feel. However, this new show went from no Zorros I find attractive to two Zorros that I find attractive to. And judging by how many people in my generation who have seen this show, I'm not alone in this boat. A lot of Gen Z people like pretty cute men over suave handsome ones, and I'm no exception. Obviously, being a good actor is more than just looks. In this case, Miguel Bernadette excels at playing this new, more unique version of Don Diego. While some purists tend to not approve of the different direction Secuoya Studio took in the direction of the character, I for one absolutely love it. This is one of the few versions of the character to have a real solidified arc. One of the arcs that genuinely really mirrors like Antonio Banderas' Zorro. He's very similar to that character, and I mean that in the best way possible. The major part of Miguel Bernadette's Zorro arc that mirrors Antonio Banderas is their quest for revenge after the death of a family member. However, there is a major difference between the two. Murrieta's arc was learn how to be Zorro from Hannibal Lecter and take your revenge in as cool and flashy a way as possible. Revenge is fucking cool.
You're doing well.
No bad at all.
But one of the things that I noticed about Miguel Bernadette's Zorro is that while he wants to avenge his father, that's what starts his journey, it's nowhere near the main motivator for him by the time the credits roll for episode 10. But I'll get more into it for the plot and themes. I will say for now that Diego's evolution from vengeful vigilante to selfless hero of the people is done way better than in Mask of Zorro, and Bernadette plays an incredibly three-dimensional, vulnerable Don Diego, who wears his emotions on his sleeve. His good nature is constantly wrestling with his wants and desires, and he's constantly unsure of himself. He falls, he gets hurt way more than any other version of Zorro in the character's history, making the audience fear for his safety often in ways that you don't for Guy Williams or Duncan Regeer. Even when interacting with other characters such as Bernardo or May, he is uniquely open around them. While Diego has always been more emotionally available than many other heroes of his time, this version takes it above and beyond. This version of Diego is constantly hugging and affirming those around him. Hell, he's even the guy who'd probably give Nalin a hug after everything that she's been through. And speaking of Nalin...
Debería arrancarte la piel y enterrarte en la mina por haber tratado a mi gente como esclavos. Pero no tengo tanto tiempo.
Okay. There is so much I need to say about this character that I think I'll wind up making a whole new video in the future about her arc, her character, and motivations. But for now, I think I'll cover the basics on her and the incredible performance from Dalia Giacolaro. First of all, the concept for Nalin is genius. I listed off a few ideas in one of my older videos on how to make a more compelling antagonist for Zorro to fight, and one of the ones I didn't list was him fighting a mirror version of himself, someone who dresses and fights similarly to him, but fights against him for whatever reason. Secuoya Studios chose to do this for Nalin, and it makes her the most compelling antagonist in Zorro history, and one of my favorite characters in the franchise. A dark reflection of the ideals and beliefs inherent in Zorro, a version of the hero with none of the optimism of Don Diego, merely a vengeful vigilante out for blood. A Zorro that doesn't move past the initial lust for revenge like Branderas or Bernadou's Zorro, but one who fully embraces it, becoming the first time, and probably the last, we'll ever see an anti-hero or even full-on villain Zorro. Dalia Giacoatl plays a character opposite to Miguel Bernadou's Zorro. While he is vulnerable, open with his emotions, and witty, Nalin is played completely straight. Nalin is motivated by grief and revenge like Diego, but unlike him, it almost completely consumes her. She rarely jokes or smiles like Diego, and while she is shown to care about those working with her or the people she fights for, she never gives them the same level of love and affection her rival Zorro does for the people in his life. Nalin is also far more brutal than Diego, and while many of her kills are deserving, there's also many who aren't. I've seen a lot of people recently advocate for a more brutal, bloody version of Zorro, and while I don't think it would work for classic Don Diego, for Nalin it is incredibly visceral and satisfying to see on screen. If it weren't for the PG-13 level of violence in the show, Nalin would be hacking people's limbs off and tearing them apart. She also commands a host of Native American warriors loyal to her, who break off from their tribe to fight for who they believe is the one true Zorro. While I've made Nalin sound like a pretty terrifying villain, she's anything but. Giacoatl's performance of Nalin, while very intense and terrifying, is also dripping with grief and sorrow. In the beginning of the show, we see the death of the previous Zorro, Pullman Foucault, but we also see Nalin mourning his loss, as he was her brother. She wants to become the next Zorro to avenge his death, but the spirit who chooses the next Zorro, Kyoche, has other plans, and it deeply wounds and angers Nalin to the point where she breaks ties with her tribe and her own serpent god, Maiha, to become who she believes to be the true Zorro to honor her brother and fight Diego. While Diego ultimately proves himself as the better Zorro, Nalin very much has a right to be angry, as a rich white man with no knowledge of indigenous culture was chosen to be Zorro over her. While I want to talk more about Nalin later in this video and in a video of her own, I will say that her actress plays the role absolutely phenomenally, and the writers created a truly compelling, unique antagonist for Zorro to fight, and that my grievances with Zorro's Rose Gallery are finally fixed. Also, before I switch topics, oh my god, I have such a mad crush on Nalin. Like, both her and Diego in this show are insanely beautiful, and I actually have like butterflies on my stomach seeing either of them on screen. Not really relevant to the character or anything, I'm just very silly. Oh my god. Out of all of the main characters, Lolita is the one I feel like is kind of the weakest. Like, okay, she's a really solid character, and if she were in another Zorro show, she'd absolutely be a standout. But when she's surrounded by great characters, she just doesn't stand out as much. I feel like I'm being kind of mean, so I want to discuss a lot of her positives first. I absolutely vibe with a lot how she absolutely takes no shit from anybody. Not her parents, not Diego, not a CGI Panther, and certainly not Nalin, who she absolutely riddles with bullets along with many other characters throughout the show. Renata Notney does a phenomenal job in portraying the confident but deeply conflicted personality of Lolita, as well as her free spirit and unwillingness to hide who she wants to be. Her love for Monasterio feels genuine, and one of the only few soft spots for the character, as she opens up to him in ways she never does for anyone else. However, that is kind of my problem with the character. Outside of Monasterio, a lot of her interactions feel less dynamic than the rest of the cast. Diego and Nalin's flip-floppy rivalry is so fascinating to me, I literally made a ship name for him. His genuine camaraderie with both Bernardo and May is adorable, and his jealousy of Monasterio melting away into general respect are, if not complex, at least endearing to the heart. but Lolita's interactions often feel a little one-dimensional. It feels like she's constantly in not taking shit from anyone mode. And well, yeah, there's also Nalin who has that. She often suffers from her inability to open up, while Lolita is mostly just vibing for the entirety of the show. For someone who has an active role in their own life, Lolita seems to be the most passive character of them all. And while she's very interesting compared to the other Zorro love interests...
This is boring! You're boring! You are so boring!
Compared to her own castmate, she stands out the least, which really bums me out. Considering how the final episodes for Season 1 have gone through, I feel like that'll change, and Lolita will probably be more active after all that's happened to her. Oh my god. I was not expecting anything about how they handled Monasterio in this show, and I mean that in an entirely positive way. Since 1957, the name Monasterio was known by Zorro fans everywhere as the embodiment of pure cruelty and evil in the franchise. Every one of his appearances only accentuates it more and more, with him constantly being portrayed as the grumbling, scheming, wrathful, and abusive dictator of Los Angeles, a shining example of everything wrong with the oppressive system Zorro fights against, but also kind of generic.
Nothing shall stop me from being the richest man in all of California.
That's it?
Like most other villains after 1957, are inspired by him in some way, and being the blueprint has the double-edged sword of being the most flat of the Zorro villains. But the show absolutely throws everything out the window with what we thought we knew of Monasterio, or of the trope of the evil Capitan as a whole. Emiliano Zorrita plays an absolutely wonderful, endearing, and lovable version of the character, a huge twist on the typical Zorro formula. While other Capitans are motivated by pure greed or a desire to feel more powerful than everyone else, Monasterio is motivated by a genuine sense of community and patriotism, which makes him feel very sympathetic, but also dangerous, as the real villain, Governor Pedro Victoria, can use and bend his morals for his own nefarious purposes.
Kill him. Kill him now.
I shouldn't.
Do it.
It makes him an incredibly nuanced and morally gray character, and whenever he comes in conflict with the other characters, you worry for his safety just as much as the protagonists. Another facet of his character is that, unlike other Zorro stories, he is the one with the main love interest. While Diego spends most of the show chasing around Lolita, and she ultimately prefers Monasterio, a far cry from his original appearance where he's considered repulsive to every woman he comes in contact with, and also Garcia.
Well, is this so difficult to understand? Look at me, Sergeant. You find me attractive?
No.
Monasterio and Lolita have a genuinely really sweet romance, with my favorite moment of theirs being in episode 3. Lolita makes a half-joke, half-serious comment that she'll marry Monasterio if he completes his task of capturing Zorro. Everyone else around at the table chastises Lolita and calls her unladylike, but Monasterio actually defends Lolita by telling her he accepts that as a challenge, protecting her from everyone else's scorn, and also giving their relationship more motivation than it already had. This was the moment he won her and simultaneously me over to their relationship. I'd like to talk more about Monasterio, but it involves spoilers, and I am gonna save that for a later portion of the video.
The time has come to meet the Creator.
Huh?
With the main 4 characters out of the way, I'd like to address the rest of the characters. And while I won't devote as much time with them, I will say every actor did a phenomenal job with their performance, and I have something positive to say about pretty much every single one of them. Out of every version of Bernardo in the Zorro franchise, Paco Tous plays the most wholesome, caring, and emotionally intelligent version of him. Bernardo serves the same role as he normally does, but what diverges is his vulnerability around Diego and May. While he is capable of being really funny like previous versions, Paco Tous is a physical comedy actor after all. He's first introduced heartbroken and in tears over Don Alejandro's death, and he is often providing emotional support to the other heroes as well as aiding in their fight against injustice. One character that particularly surprised me was the first Zorro before Diego, Pullman Quaquera, played by Cristo Fernandez. This character by himself plays a pretty small role, only having around 13 minutes of screen time across 2 episodes, but the impact he leaves on several of the main characters lasts for the whole season. Not only does his death in the first 10 minutes of the show affect Naleen's arc, but is the catalyst of Diego's arc as well. Pullman Quaquera is the blueprint for how both Zorros carry out their work, each of them taking different elements of him as inspiration, including basically splitting his arsenal between them. Overall, a pretty minor character, but a pretty badass and important one. Also, he's kind of handsome too. All 3 Zorro actors are so pretty in this show, oh my god. There was another character I was not expecting to join Zorro's quest for justice on the Nintendo DS, and that is Mei, played by Cha-Cha Huang. I absolutely love this character so much, and I'm so happy they added her. She is ridiculously funny, and her interactions with Diego and Bernardo are just very hilarious, as well as the times that she gets to interact with some of the other cast members.
She only speaks Chinese.
Nasty.
Her inclusion in the story is also really cool in getting a Chinese perspective, as the show explores the Chinese community in California, which has been around for a very long time. With how the season ends, I can't wait to see how she grows as a character and her interactions with Diego. In a similar vein, another character I find super interesting is the antagonist of Mei's arc, Senor Chang. He is a Chinese crime boss with his own private army, who kowtows to the Mexican rancheros on the surface, but uses it to gain more power for himself. He serves as a direct antagonist to Mei and is an indirect one to Diego. Yes, he can't directly hurt the guy, and he has to play his game trying to work around him. He was one of the archetypes I was talking about earlier in my Zorro villains video, and he essentially fits the role of the indirect fighter perfectly. Not every character is sunshine and rainbows, though. A character that disappointed me was Samael, the cold-hearted merc for hire recruited by Vanderveen to steal the De La Vega fortune. As a concept, Samael goes hard. A cold-blooded killer armed with a weapon that's not even supposed to exist yet, and running around smoking random civilians sounds like a blast of an idea for a Zorro villain. He's not a Zorro villain. No, like literally, he doesn't get to fight Zorro. Yes, he uses his Colt Patterson in 1836. Funny enough, he uses it more than the first guy to have the weapon in this franchise. But he never once comes across Diego in his costume. And I really hope Season 2 fixes that, because I've already seen so many people make fun of this guy. There's a multitude of other characters that I need to see more of, like Lolita's mother, Ramirez, the Russians, and Mr. Vanderveen before I have full opinions of them. I like what they have so far, but outside of some spoiler stuff with some of their plot details, I don't have much to say about them. With the characters out of the way, I'd like to move on to...
Bájenlo.
Throughout the Zorro franchise, one thing that's been pretty commonly excelled at is the tone balancing of Zorro. Zorro himself is a pretty typically light-hearted character, but the world he lives in isn't. The 19th century was a time of immense cruelty, bigotry, atrocities, and all kinds of other horrible things. Zorro's villains at best bully and harass those with less power, and at worst, commit acts of genocide, assault, slavery, and so much worse. At the franchise's best, Zorro balances its swashbuckling sense of humor with a somewhat uncomfortable edge. And at worst, A lot of recent Zorro stuff has kind of had a problem where, due to primarily being made for children and not for general audiences, with 2001's The Amazing Zorro, 2006's entertaining but slightly shallow Generation Z, the questionable Zorro the Chronicles, and most infamously 2005's The Legend of Zorro have all suffered from this. As of the 21st century, many people often think of Zorro himself as a joke. And while I think it's partially because the franchise has recently treated him like a joke, the comics and the books, while they may have given the franchise a decent bit of reverence, Zorro is often treated like the butt of the joke by many of his recent animated and live-action outings, and it's only really made his obscurity sting even more. The new Zorro show, however, alleviates much of this problem because of how amazing it balances a lot of the timeless aspects of the franchise, from its action, romance, drama, and comedy. Secuoya Studios' Zorro embodies both the silly and intense aspects of the character, creating a story that can be enjoyed by pretty much any fan of this franchise, no matter if their favorite is Gay Blade or the 2004 novel. Every single episode has dramatic moments that'll make you hold your breath right next to the scenes that'll make you laugh or at least giggle, mixed with amazing swashbuckling heroics and romance. A good example is, ironically enough, the beginning of the show. It opens with an intense scenario filled with swashbuckling heroics and cool action timed with a killer song. And then both Don Alejandro and Zorro fucking die. While the idea of Alejandro being injured or even killed is not a new idea in this franchise, the sudden deaths of two major characters right off the bat, including Zorro himself, sets the tone for the entire series that, while there will be a sense of lighthearted swashbuckling and mischievousness, the show is not afraid to get real and show serious consequences in a more intense take on the characters and the world. Previous Zorros often tone mixed by having different tones directed to different characters. This could be easily seen as early on as the dichotomy between the silly foppish Diego turning into the vengeful, cold, and deadly serious Curse of Capistrano in the original pulp novel sharing the same name. But definitely the most famous example would be in Disney Zorro, where Sergeant Garcia was, mostly, played for laughs, while Don Alejandro was often the most serious, intelligent man in the room, with him only really being more comedic when he's messing around with Diego.
Never see the day, young man, that you hear me scream in pain.
This show is a little different, as every character has the opportunity to be funny, serious, epic, or complex in their own ways. As much as I laughed at Diego getting absolutely bullied by Lolita in the first episode, seeing his emotional struggles throughout the show and mourning his father, and struggling with his new responsibility tugged at my heartstrings. While it was funny seeing him get ragdolled by a bunch of soldiers and then Nolan was hilarious, seeing him systematically take down an entire gang of bank robbers in just over a minute was super cool. Nolan ping-pongs between me, feeling super sorry for how things have gone in her life, and chuckling like a madman watching her turn civilians like carne asada with her tomahawks, and looking super beautiful while doing it too. For as funny as May is throughout the show, her introduction is anything but, for we see her sold into slavery and forced to work for one of the most slimy, terrible people in the entire show. And while I'm rarely interested in Zorro romance, I found myself captivated by Monasterio and Lolita's relationship, and clapping like a seal watching him annihilate the clan of the bear. Due to the tonal and genre diversity present in these characters, we get a cast of more fleshed out characters with lots of nuance.
Rosario, hijo mío. Tarda pero llega, la verdad no es ciega.
This is honestly the part of the video I've been the most excited for. One of the best things about this show is that it has a lot to say compared to other Zorros. While the Zorro franchise has always had social themes and messaging to it, this show has a lot to say politically, socially, philosophically, and even spiritually at times. It's definitely the Zorro with the most to say, and it feels like it fits perfectly for our own world and present times. One of the things I absolutely love is about the show is it's always showcasing the cultural diversity of California. In modern day and in its history, California has always been a place of various cultures, ethnicities, and languages. And while the Spanish and Mexican periods gave it a large Spanish-speaking majority, and the American period gave it an English-speaking one, California has always had a large variety of different people, who come from all around the world. The Zorro franchise has somewhat addressed this throughout its history, with books like the 2004 Isabel Allende novel and La Espada y la Rosa talking about some of the various groups such as the Roma, or The Legend of Zorro often incorporating people of various cultures and races into its set pieces, but the new show gives a lot of focus to the idea of California belonging to just about everyone. We see so many different kinds of people in the show, including Californios born in the Spanish or Mexican period, Spaniards who moved or stayed in California, Mexican citizens, indigenous people, Chinese immigrants, Russian traders, and a few others such as the French newspaper owner and his American employee, who also I believe is the first black woman to ever make a live-action appearance in the Zorro franchise. The coolest part, too, is that many of these characters get to have agency in this story. And, well, yes, there have always been Native Americans in Zorro. Many of them are often either helpless victims of oppression, outright antagonists, or are nuanced but only in material like comics or novels, which only I and a few scant others have ever seen. Yes, there have been Asian characters in Zorro since the 50s, but far too few of them to make a difference, and many of them are either one-and-dones or background characters. And while there have been, many well-written female Zorro characters, not to this extent. Even some of the really amazing characters like Victoria Escalante, or beloved ones like Elena Montero, are still female character first, love interest to Zorro second, and character third. But the new show, to an extent, fixes all of these problems. Many female characters in the new show could have easily been played by men and just happened to be women, like Nalin. And personally, while I ship her with Diego, the fact that she doesn't have a romantic subplot yet is hugely refreshing. And also the fact that she is an indigenous person serving as one of the main characters, and even as Zorro, is huge. And while I wish there were more indigenous voices or even a name for the tribe, side note, I learned recently that despite the show not listing the name of the tribe, according to many sources that I've seen, are the Kumeyaay, which are a real Native American tribe in California. It is nonetheless really awesome. Same with May, a Chinese woman who, well, not super important at first, grows to become more relevant to the story, with her having her own struggles and interactions with other characters. And speaking of Chinese characters, Senior Chang is such a good villain. Well, he's an indirect villain, one of the archetypes that I mentioned in my villains vid, and one that I felt like would give Zorro a lot of trouble, and oh boy he does. Zorro can't punch or stab him, and while he can fight his bodyguards well, the man himself, due to his connections and knowledge, cannot be touched. He isn't super macho, but he also avoids the emasculation many Asian antagonists in fiction are often put through, with him being a confident, intelligent, and thoughtful threat to Diego that requires the fox to play his own game to keep him at bay. Another interesting theme is that how the show reflects gender, both masculinity and femininity. During the filming of the show, many of the quotes from Secuoya were about how they handle their female characters, so much so that we had no idea what Zorro himself would be. I was kind of worried at first, I'll admit, that the writing for them would have been more focused on the female characters trying to one-up the male ones. However, that worry was completely alleviated upon actually seeing the show. There are multiple female characters in the show that express different facets of their femininity, and it's all portrayed as valid. Lolita has more masculine traits and hobbies, like guns, and wearing more masculine clothing for the time, but also embraces more feminine traits as well, like fashion, especially in her relationships with Monasterio, and it all feels completely genuine. And while there are themes of her struggling against the patriarchal norms of the time, I like how she never compromises herself for the sake of fitting in. Nalin could have easily been a male character and not much would have changed, and honestly, she would have been just as good of a character. Both Lolita's mother and the Baroness Irina Ivanova use their traditional femininity and patriarchal facets as masks to hide their agendas and schemes, and May, while she is portrayed as completely traditionally feminine, does so by her own will and not because she's forced to by Diego or Bernardo. Almost every female character in the show is incredibly nuanced, and Secuoya Studios very much lived up to their word in that way. What I find very interesting though, and also very understated, was how they portrayed and discussed masculinity. The show thankfully avoids the pitfalls some stories tend to take in giving no nuance to masculinity compared to femininity, often devolving into a girls rule, boys drool message, which helps nobody. The new Zorro show, while it does cover concepts of patriarchy and toxic masculinity heavily, it also has a lot more nuanced, more ideal portrayals of masculinity that pleasantly surprised me. The biggest example being Diego himself. I already mentioned that Miguel Bernadao isn't the standard pick for a Zorro actor, and that people tend to be really mean to him because he's not very traditional. But I think it's absolutely genius in how it highlights the more grounded, healthy masculinity of this version of Don Diego. Unlike other Zorros who are very suave, super confident, amazing with the ladies, and rarely has any emotional struggle, this version of Diego is rarely sure of himself, isn't afraid to openly show emotions like sadness, fear, or envy. He is more pretty than handsome, and has to rely on the help of others rather than just being a one-man army. His choice to let Lolita fall in love with Monasterio and marry him speaks volumes to his maturity and lack of real ego problems, and while obviously he's naturally broken up over it, he's still happy for both of them that they found a happy relationship. Speaking of Monasterio, God, he's such a switch up from the toxic mess that was the villain from 1957. Monasterio is a military man, which you would expect would bring a lot of machismo. However, despite on the outset being pretty stereotypically masculine, he is a genuinely well-rounded person who never really abuses his authority, has a very compassionate moral code towards pretty much everyone, treats Lolita as a partner and not an object, and defends her when she's criticized by her patriarchal surroundings. He also never stoops to having any beef with Diego for their shared love of her, which is so refreshing. He actually quite respects Diego, and the two hatch an absolutely brilliant plan to bring down the clan of the Bear. Cleverly using the tired trope of two men fighting over each other to claim a woman, Monasterio fakes his death at the hands of Diego, lulling the clan into a false sense of security, until both of them ambush them and take out the majority of their forces. I absolutely love this, and that highlights the good that male friendships, bonds, and camaraderie can do instead of rivalry and pointless competition. Meanwhile, there are other characters, most of them being the villains, who are plagued with toxic masculinity and outdated ideas of what it's like to be a man, and it winds up screwing them over. Tadeo Marquez, the father of Lolita, constantly alienates her with how he views a woman to act, driving a wedge further and further into their family, as well as his infatuation with the Baroness Ivanova, until both eventually lead to his death at her hands. Both the Russian Baron and Governor Pedro Victoria are constantly vying for domination over others, and are obsessed with chasing power to such a degree that they don't notice when they are betrayed by others, leading to Victoria's gruesome end and the Baron's ousting from his position. Ramirez is an absolute creep who treats people with less power than him, especially women, like absolute trash, and meets his end by a woman with more power than him. And speaking of the character who killed Ramirez, Nalin, despite being a woman, has a lot of elements of toxic masculinity within her character that I found utterly fascinating. While her being upset at Diego, a rich white man, being the next Zorro is a very valid complaint to have, a lot of her actual enmity over Diego seems to be based off of a very petty sense of entitlement to the role of Zorro, as she believes that she's more fit to be Zorro than him because she is her and he is him, and often criticizes, belittles, or blows off any observation that Diego might be doing good in his new role. She constantly views herself in competition with him, constantly fighting him instead of focusing on the real enemy, oftentimes having it more of her treating it like a sport. She also rarely, if ever, listens or takes advice from others like Diego or Cuervo Nocturno, believing that she is the only authority in fighting for justice, and most of all, she never, ever shows any form of vulnerability, and most of her emotions come out as anger or jealousy, some of the only emotions that are considered valid under toxic masculinity. We rarely ever see her openly sad, or scared, or happy, or any of the other emotions within the spectrum, and when we do see her feel things like that, they always manifest as expressions of anger or insecurity. This is something I absolutely love about Nalin, and it makes her incredibly, very unique as a character, to see her try and overcome this and learn to let go and be more vulnerable with others, especially Diego. Another interesting thing about this new show is how a lot of the protagonists have to deal with consequences. Now, this probably makes zero sense to anyone who's not seen a Zorro thingy in their lives, but in most Zorro stories, the concepts of death and oppression and loss feel a little hand-waved sometimes. Yes, sometimes we get a sad death, or people's lives are irrevocably altered. But life keeps going on, and the world of Zorro keeps spinning. But in this show, every bad thing that ever happened to anyone has real consequences that haunt people. We see this already in the beginning with the death of Don Alejandro. Not only is this the beginning of the death knell for the clan of the Bear itself, but Alejandro's death is also a consequence of him originally being a part of the group to begin with. Secuoya Studios' Zorro has a similar plotline to the Batman, where just like Bruce Wayne learning the unsettling truths of his family history, Diego learned that his father was a former member of the clan who eventually ended his life. Another event in the story highlighting the negative consequences of taking a life is when Diego, whether out of vengeance or self-defense, slays the brother of Carmen de la Madrid, a member of the clan of the Bear. She swears her own vengeance upon Diego, making her another major addition to his rogues gallery. The most major example, however, is in episode 2, where the premise of the episode is of a son of a soldier that Zorro killed, the original one, Pullman Quicker, who wants revenge on Zorro due to it ruining his family's lives. Zorro killed this soldier in self-defense. He was basically doing the right thing, and the guy he killed wasn't a good person. But regardless of something is an understandable choice or not, there are always consequences. Nalin causes similar problems when she kills soldiers and steals the wheat and grain from Mexican government transports, which we then see her feeding the tribe that got displaced by the government. But when we see all of the people who starved because she took all of their food, was Nalin justified in doing anything to protect her people regardless of the consequences? Sure, but it doesn't change the fact that every action, no matter how well-meaning, has consequences that affect people that must be addressed. In previous Zorro stories, the poor family the government is harassing gets to keep their rancho by the end, or the innocent man to be hanged is rescued at the last second by Zorro. But in this show, sometimes that doesn't happen. People are executed, mutilated, they lose everything and can never get it back. And every loss, whether it's a major character who we know and love like May losing her sister, or something as minor as one of Nalin's soldiers being gunned down in cold blood, feels impactful, even very painful most of the time. Every person who we see as a victim of injustice is more than just a goal for Zorro or just a victim or object. They're a human being who suffers and loses just like the rest of us, and it makes Zorro's thirst for justice feel only even more real. The last interesting question the show brings up that I'd like to mention, involving both Nalin and Diego, is that of grief and vengeance. The show opens up with both characters losing the last of their biological family in one terrible night. The two of them, with their skill sets and drive, naturally pursue violent means of looking for revenge, with Diego begrudgingly accepting his role as Zorro, partially because he has a good heart, but also so he can avenge his father, Don Alejandro. And Nalin takes the role of Zorro for herself to avenge the previous masked avenger, her brother Pullman Quicker. One of the most painful aspects of the show is that you can really feel the absence of both of these dead characters. In most other Zorro stories, the De La Vega Hacienda has a lot of banter and dialogue involving Don Alejandro, his arguing, his protesting, and the various other things he'd say to his son and to others. In this show, however, the Hacienda, for the most part, feels deafeningly quiet. We really feel the fact that he's not with us anymore, and it feels so much more bleak and lonely than in any other previous incarnation of Zorro. There's a painting in one of the rooms that, while also important to the plot, also serves as a haunting reminder of what once was. Diego's father once lived there, and now he'll never be able to live there again. Pullman Quicker, from what little we saw of him in the show, made him seem very likable. He was kind, brave, chivalrous, forthright, and he seemed to have a genuine connection with his sister, and it makes complete sense why she's so angry. Like Alejandro, his absence can also be felt, as the outfit that he wore in life is now used by both Diego and Nalin, although noticeably he's the only one where it completely fits. The original Zorro outfit looks utterly silly on Diego, and on Nalin it barely fits her when she wears it. While the beginning of their grief is basically the same, where it leads them is entirely different to one another. While both of these characters don the title of the Mask of Zorro, Diego quickly learns to move on beyond his vengeance and focus on helping the people of California. Guided by the spiritual and emotional wisdom of Cuervo Nocturno, Diego is molded into a selfless superhero, at least on the surface. While his need for blind vengeance is gone, his pain and grief still remains. He deeply misses his father, and while his good nature prevents him from doing anything rash, he is forced to put his murder and the surrounding mystery to rest until it comes up in the main plot, as the clan of the Bear and its supremacist views are discovered. Diego's personal motive and his selfless need to protect others intersect, and the plot rewards him, but not with vengeance, but justice for his father's murder. The woman who wound up shooting him, Lolita's mother and the leader of the clan, is forced into hiding, her hidden empire shattered and on the verge of destruction. Nalin, on the other hand, is a completely different, while still thematically fitting, arc. Her path diverges from Diego's right around the time his own path diverges, when Kyoche chooses him to be Zorro, and not Nalin. Not only was her brother's life robbed from her and her tribe by a brutal imperialistic force, but his title, his mask, his face is stolen from her, in her eyes, by a member of that very imperialistic invading force. Is Nalin correct in viewing Diego with as much as an enemy as the governor? Not really. Is it an understandable reaction? I think it could be argued that it is. I want to talk more about her story in another video, but I will say that while Diego is lifted out of his thirst for vengeance by his friends, his found family, Cuervo Nocturno's guidance, and the many voices begging for help in California, Nalin only sinks deeper and deeper into the empty, bottomless pit of revenge and hatred and rage she was unwillingly cast into. Every terrible action that she commits from episode 1 onwards, while completely inexcusable, although some of her actions are deeply justified, her actions come from a deeply sense of feeling robbed, or betrayed and pushed into a corner by her own tribe, her gods, the Mexican government, and by her nemesis. However, as the show progresses, said nemesis doesn't really live up to that evil imperialistic image that she paints of him. She grows to respect and even work alongside Diego, but even then she won't let go of her resentment to him. This culminates in episode 8, following a near-death experience in her Hail Mary to assassinate Monasterio and Lolita. Nalin pits herself against De La Vega one last time, and while she gains the upper hand against him, she sees in his eyes the fox spirit Kyoche and realizes this whole time she's claimed possession of what she believed to be rightfully hers, but in reality belonged not just to her, not just to Diego or her brother, but everyone. She gives up on her quest to claim the mask, but not in fighting for the people. Both her and Diego put vengeance and hate behind by the end of the season and are better for it. The show's most powerful ethos is that of setting aside the toxic poison of vengeance, replacing it with something more selfless and all-encompassing. That extinguishing the souls of others in anger will only erode your own, and that the real solution is to make peace with your pain, and to make the world a better place so it doesn't happen to anyone ever again. As Cuervo Nocturno so elegantly put it,
La venganza es personal. La justicia es para todos.
And that is the end of The Return of Zorro, how Secuoya Studios revived a legend. I wanted to thank everyone involved in Secuoya Studios and Zorro Productions Inc. for creating this show, and I wanted to thank all of my subscribers for sticking with me by this point. I know this video has been a long time coming, by, 2 years, but genuinely thank you to everyone who's stuck around to this point, and everyone who's enjoying this video. I promise I'll keep making more content like this in the future, and I'll release it a lot more in increments like I have with this video, so you'll be able to see it faster. And expect more podcast episodes and a few other fun little projects along the way. In the meantime, see you around, guys. And justice for all.